Why is it that certainly civilian organizations do so poorly with recognizing their people?
You do have to hold up in front of the group excellence. Make sure that you've identified somebody that the rest of them will actually acknowledge. It's nice that he's recognizing her because she did deliver the goods on a big event during the year. If you're the lieutenant in charge of a platoon of 40 soldiers and food comes in Mermite containers, then make sure you eat last.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm delighted to have General Barry McCaffrey join us on the show. General McCaffrey is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. He served and led troops in 2 wars, Vietnam and the Gulf War, and he was awarded multiple medals, including 2 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts. He served as Commander of U.S. Southern Command also. Following retirement from the Army, he served as the Director of Office of National Drug Policy under President Clinton, and since he has served on the board of directors of multiple corporations and nonprofits. This is going to be a great episode, and you'll definitely want to stick around to the end when General McCaffrey shares with us a bonus story, if you will, of what it looks like to eat last and be on the first chopper. General McCaffrey, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate you being here, and additionally, thank you for serving our nation.
Good to be with you, Tom.
Since the last time that we spoke, I've really been thinking a lot about different things that you said. One of the things that you talked about when we talked last was one of your 5 maxims, and that was thank, recognize, praise, reward, and give credit. Why is appreciating our people so important for successful leadership?
Well, there's probably a lot of different ways to take on that question, but I tell people one of them is working in the federal government. I had 250 employees. They all knew each other's salary. They were all very talented people, expert in their area. But I tell people when I walk through the office spaces, I wouldn't see posted on their wall the bonus they got last year for exemplary service. Instead, I'd see a certificate that said Best Employee 1986. It's important for us to recognize that, yes, salary is important, working conditions, the nature of the leadership, the importance of the mission. But at the end of the day, people want to be treasured, valued as part of a team. And it's incumbent upon those of us who are managing or leading organizations to take that into account. It's one of your prime responsibilities, not universal praise. Certainly being demanding, being attentive to standards, but at the end of the day, you got to tell people in front of others, you did a good job today.
Yeah, that's really important. I think a really important concept with regard to leadership. Certainly in the leadership literature, people have studied this and they have looked at specifically, you talked about nobody puts up, I got this salary and made that bonus for the year. It's something that was decades ago, parchment that's just hanging there, rolled and so forth, that says, hey, they thought I did a great job and I'm proud of that. And so as people have studied this, what you find often, this is true in medicine, this is true in other fields, certainly where it's been studied, but what you find is that managers, people in administrative positions, in leadership positions and so forth, think that people want money. And in fact, a lot of times employees think that they want money, that will make them feel like they're appreciated. And people have studied this, and they have found that if you give someone a raise, the luster of that raise, as far as demonstrating appreciation to the employee, is very short-lived. The half-life on it is very short because rapidly people come to see that as, well, I deserve that salary because I do this great work and I'm important. And so in a very short order, what was demonstration of appreciation is not recognized by the person who receives it anymore. And so it loses any effect. And so you're very quickly back to where you started as it pertains to that. So the money, you're absolutely right, does not help.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that a word that you used that really hit me when you were speaking a minute ago was treasured. This idea of treasured. And what would you say are good techniques to really convey to those that we're leading that they are treasured?
Well, one of the things I tell people is that over time, as you watch other leaders, you'll learn a lot. By the way, from seeing things happen that you say, "I'm never doing that when I'm in that position." So
It's like being a parent.
a whole array of techniques and mannerisms and ways of managing people that you'll say, I don't want to do that. But the other thing you do is you see, a series of ways that leaders conduct themselves that you want to emulate. And so you got this grab bag of tricks on the shelf, and you ought to use them. Some of them are quite simple. Say we, not I.
Mhm.
Talk about the team's success. One of them that you seized upon earlier was the notion in the military. You tell people, hey, if you're the lieutenant in charge of a platoon of 40 soldiers and food comes in mermite containers, then make sure you eat last. If there's a combat assault coming up, make sure you're on the first helicopter. On Friday afternoon when there's maintenance and motor stables and you got 100 armored vehicles out there and it's freezing cold and getting dark and the weekend's coming, make sure you're still in the motor pool with your subordinates up until the end of the duty day. So I think it is useful to say, look, there's a grab bag of techniques and make sure you're using them.
Yeah. So some ambidextry, if you will, with regard to this, and it depends on, I think, the situation. I would say, and the person, right? Like that's another thing that I think organizations, and you can speak to this quite well, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Organizations often get wrong is because it's one size fits all, right? It's this person, we're gonna give everybody this bonus, we're gonna give everybody this pen, we're gonna give everybody this watch, whatever it may be. There's some people who like to be acknowledged openly. There are other people that just terrifies them. My wife is an introvert. She's not excited about getting up in front of a big audience. Um, Based on our conversations to this point and knowing myself, you and I are more on the extroverted side of things, so that's probably not a problem for us. But organizations do seem to just rubber stamp and distribute without thought, it seems. So, yeah, this idea of contextual praise and recognition, I think, is important.
Well, to pick up on that point, by the way, I think it's also there's a pressure on management, on leadership to say if we've got a pot of bonus money at the end of the year, we got $1 million, we got 10 employees, we're going to divvy it up. If we divvy it up exactly equally, there'll be the least disruption. They'll all be somewhat bent out of shape that excellence wasn't recognized, but basically you're avoiding trouble. And I believe that's the worst thing you can do, that you do have to hold up in front of the group excellence and make sure that you've identified somebody that the rest of them will actually acknowledge. It's nice that he's recognizing her because she did deliver the goods on a big event during the year. My two-star boss and I once kept looking at the bonus pool, and they were doing just that. Everyone got an equal share. And the two of us said, look, we spend 14 hours a day working with these people. There's a bunch of them that jump out at us as having been extraordinary in their capabilities.
Yeah.
Why don't we give them disproportionate recognition, which is what organizations should do?
Yeah. I think you're hitting on something that is pervasive, I would say, in our culture right now is this idea of fairness and equity, and people throw those words around, and they think that it means everybody gets the same thing. And in reality, the least fair thing you can do is to not think about people as individuals and take into consideration the fact that this person over here worked 60 hours, 100 hours, whatever it may be, and is responsible for 90% of the revenue or the success of an organization. And giving that person the same watch or whatever it may be that you're giving somebody who really is not contributing to the organization in a meaningful way. And that erodes, I think, the esprit de corps, the culture of the organization and group, and actually makes it less likely to be successful. That's my observation, and looking at it from the lens of what people have studied and found in organizations.
Most institutions end up with a system for getting rid of bad performers fairly effectively. Whether it's brutal, like Welch at General Electric, he wanted to fire the bottom 10% every year, which is
Neutron Jack.
Simply outrageous. But basically, over time, people who are dishonest and lazy and in the wrong job, they're supposed to be dealing with computers, but they're not good at computer science. Mostly organizations figure out how to flush them out the bottom. One of the challenges is making the overwhelming majority of the employees, the workers, feel appreciated and dealt with fairly. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you do have a responsibility to try and bring attention to super performers and to recognize them. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself is a real challenge. You also mentioned, I think, Tom, a good point. A lot of people don't want to be leaders, and so they want to be recognized as excellent in their duties. They don't want to be the person that opens the conference. They want to be the person that gets the spreadsheet done correctly every week reliably. I just took a tour of the cherry industry in Yakima, Washington. It was absolutely fascinating. Mm-hmm. The whole processing, packing plants are state-of-the-art computer science, beyond belief. An individual cherry is photographed 84 times with multispectral things so that later on they could track that one cherry back to the farm, the row, and the person who picked it. Wow. So it's amazing science and technology. But at the end of the day, the people are the ones that make it work. And this sort of older woman passed us in the processing plant, wearing shorts and a hoodie and very, nice manner about her. And the guy, the partner who's taking me to the plant said, she's in charge of quality control, a non-high school graduate, immigrant from Mexico. Her devotion to duty, he said she started at the bottom with her parents picking cherries. Mm-hmm. And now she's making $90 an hour as a supervisor of quality control. Good and she said, when they get a new batch of cherries in, the truck arrives at 2 a.m. for this short growing season. She's sleeping in her car, so she's on hand to start the quality control process. Wow. So again, the fact that they were smart enough, this organization, to recognize, to promote, and to treasure this employee is what all managers should be aspiring to.
Yeah, well, that's great. I was wondering, from your experience, can you recall an example where recognizing, praising, rewarding really had a significant impact on the group you were leading?
Well, I think it's a continuous process. A lot of things that make leadership work or not work. And certainly, number one, I always tell people, the most overwhelmingly requirement for leadership is be an expert at what you do. There's simply no substitute for it. We got into a period for years there where they said, well, if you're a manager, if you got an MBA from Harvard or Stanford, it doesn't matter whether you're building cars or packing cherries. It's all basically metrics to get an outcome. Nothing could be farther from the truth. If you're going to run a factory building cars, you ought to know a lot about manufacturing of vehicles.
Sure.
I think that applies in medicine, that applies in the military. You got to understand what you're doing. And over time, then people say, well, we better listen to her. The last time, 10 times she told us to do something, it turned out it was right. So that's number one. But then the other things, you want people to recognize your character. You want people to say, well, the platoon leader is 22, but he's always praising us in front of the boss, giving credit to us for the positive outcomes. So it's a sort of a measure of character, and where your employees, your soldiers are saying, I'd like to be more like Sue. And then finally, I think it also has a sense of the whole leadership ethos of, does this person have a way to get groups of people to do tough, demanding jobs on time, under budget, or in the case of a combat unit, can keep us alive? And those leadership capabilities are the ones that really, in the end of the day, mark elite organizations that do everything pretty good. And part of it is recognizing the one that stood up and said, it's Friday afternoon, the weekend's approaching, there's a crisis in marketing in Idaho, and that person says, well, I'd be glad to go and be there on Monday morning. And that's a person that needs to be recognized around the conference table.
Yeah. There's so much there as you were speaking. One of the things I want to touch on is a letter to Garcia, so I'll pin that for a second. But you talked about character, you talked about competence, and so in the study of the 4 stars, the 4 C's of leadership that came out of that were character, competence, caring, and communication. And I've since replicated that in a study of physician leaders when I was at Stanford, and so that paper's coming out soon. And those overlay exactly the same in medicine, so that great leadership is great leadership. It doesn't matter the context, and because you're dealing with humans are humans, whatever their context. And so those 4 C's, you're right. Character, competence, you have to have those. If you're incompetent, then you don't even usually get into the conversation. There are some domains in society where that does not hold true. But for the most part, if you're incompetent, you don't get in a conversation when it comes to leadership or leadership positions. But character being a bedrock. I wanted to come back to this as you were talking, this letter to Garcia. I'm sure you've read that multiple times, but when you were saying the person who says, I'm willing to be there on Monday morning when the place opens, that person that you just know you can depend on, you say, this needs to happen, and they go and do without question in a real sense. That's an important characteristic and something that should be, as you are saying, recognized, appreciated, and rewarded.
Just to pick up on that point, Tom, another factor that's underrated, I was out at Duke University several years back, and it was their leadership week for MBA students. And so there was a keynote speaker and that sort of thing. We had great fun talking to these. And by the way, I love graduate students, who are 26 and paying for their own education, and started up after 5 years in the workforce. They're a lot more fun to deal with than a sophomore thinking about what's coming up in the weekend. But they asked to have a follow-on seminar with me, and maybe 50 or 60 young people, and they're all just, sparks jumping off them. And it was interesting to me. I finally figured out that what they really wanted to know the secret to success, the magic one factor that would change everything. And I said, well, first of all, I said intelligence is extremely important, because if you're stupid, you worry about the wrong things. So intelligence is a factor. I said there's tons of people out there that are really bright, and education's vital. But there's a lot of people who went through, had straight A's at University of Kansas in finance, and they know what they're doing. And and looking attractive is always a X factor. And I went on and on, but I said at the end of the day, the one thing that will make you stand out among your brothers and sisters, and by the way, it's not the high boss that will be recognized in this, but your peer group and the people slightly ahead of you, is, are you willing to work hard? And I said, that person gets a reputation, and 10 years later, somebody says, well, let's get Mike to do it. He always delivers the goods. So we should never underestimate, the major factor. Are you willing to work hard? And I don't mean a drudge, and that you never take time off to read novels, have a spiritual life, have friends, play sports. All that's important. But at the end of the day, is your number one mission something you're willing to go all out to achieve?
Yeah. People respect that, I think. And they trust that you're going to do what needs to be done. And those two things are vital with regard to successful leadership. People got to trust you, respect you as a person, and so forth. So one thing that I was wondering, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, and you mentioned it with regards to corporations and things of that nature, is why is it that certainly civilian organizations just do so poorly with recognizing their people, appreciating their people?
Well, it's a good question. I think some institutions are built, have so much depth in them. There's such a training program. The institution is so strong and enduring that it's easier for me to fit in as a new vice president at Boeing than it would be if I came in and started a smaller outfit. So some of it's just situational. There's no question about it. And I think the other one is that a lot of financial metrics drive people to short-term expectations. It's just astonishing that the quarter coming up, your EBITDA, your net revenue, your rejection rate, your collection on outstanding debts, financial metrics tend to drive everything. And I tell people, I've been in boards where if you listen to 8 hours of the board meeting, you might not know what we actually did. You'd know how well we were doing it, but we'd never talk about the products and the competition. So I think that's another factor. But I also think to some extent it's a culture. And by the way, it starts with something obvious. I was in a wonderful company, high-end engineering design, total integrity, experience, one of the best firms I ever read with. And the first thing I pointed out to them, and by the way, the leadership lived all over the country, various places. When I walked in the corporate headquarters, there were no photos up of the leadership of the organization. They're very engineering guys or sort of gals are modest, quiet, self-effacing, stereotyping, I know, but they tend not to be big egos. And I tell people, you got to make sure you brochure the people who are running the company. And by the way, let me see your resume. Is your resume only the 19 bridges that I've helped design, or do you put in there that I was the first one that went to college in my family, and I coached a little league team, and the stuff that gives you credibility as a person in the minds of your employees. So it's also incumbent upon leadership to make sure you explain to the organization why you should be listening to me.
Mhm.
I went to Stanford University Medical School. I was a resident in the following program. All that adds to the reason why, well, when Tom says something, maybe we ought to pay attention to what he's telling us to do.
Yeah. This idea of appreciation when people have studied it and they look at reasons that people leave organizations, it is time and again the leading reason. They feel unappreciated. And it's usually unappreciated by their boss. People, they say people leave their boss. They don't leave the organization per se.
Mm.
So that's from the studies that have been done, appreciation really does come out as important if you want to retain great people. And then one thing that you hit on that made me start thinking, you mentioned, it's easier for you to fit into a big, like as a vice president at Boeing or something like that. And I started thinking about the scale of organizations and that ultimately there are two things about that hinder effective appreciation, I think. First is nobody knows anyone. There's no relationship. It's just people are coming and doing their job. The organization's so large that it's just mechanical in that way. And so it's hard if you don't know someone, you don't know what they need for appreciation to be effective. The second thing is, and I've seen this in multiple institutions in academic medicine, is that there are some people in leadership positions, won't call them leaders, some people in leadership positions who see people as disposable. And so they won't worry about appreciating anyone because they feel like, oh, we can just get someone else and plug them in there and it'll be fine. And woe unto thee when you operate like that with your organization. Even the most vaunted organizations will eventually succumb to that kind of mentality.
Yeah, no question. I think you're dead right on that.
So, General McCaffrey, I'm sure the people that are listening are probably thinking a few things. One of them is probably it's easy to appreciate star performers, but you don't really know the people in my shop, right? That I may be lacking in star performers out there, and so for those people, what would you say?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it seems to me that at the end of the day, the 80% of employees that do their job, show up reliability, soldiers the same way. That's the reason why you're going to succeed. The star performance can't deliver. The people who are not doing their job usually get eliminated over time. So it's the bulk of the employees that have a corporate culture, a unit culture. And by the way, you mentioned large organizations. The armed forces, the U.S. Armed Forces, is 2.1 million women and men in the active guard and reserves. But I would argue the way this thing is structured with independent leadership, so that at battalion and company level, meaning 800 soldiers, 120 soldiers, there's a tremendous understanding of each other and knowledge, and people know the names of their families. And one of the great books you and I discussed before we started talking was Good to Great.
Yes, sir.
Under an academic, his work was just fabulous. And one of the things he said was that at the end of the day, people who stay loyally with a company, the number one question that will correlate to them being loyal to the company is, do I have a friend at work? And in great organizations, the whole squad-sized unit, 10 or 12 people that
Mhm.
work in common bonds, know each other and majority of the time like and admire each other. So I think you're entirely correct. It's not just the 22-year-old with sparks jumping off him that just got hired by Amazon Prime Computer Science, but it's the bulk of the workers who are quite reliable year after year doing their job under difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on this relationship. You're hitting on the third C, I think, in the four C's of leadership, caring, that there is some human concern and connection um, between leader and those that they lead, as well as amongst the group, that people care about each other. I think that, and this is a question that I sort of tossed out to a prior guest, and I'd like to get your take on it. But there's this in professional domains, there's this ethos that as a leader you can't care about, or really, I'll use the word love somebody that you're leading. That's a taboo. And I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm just like having real concern. People, a lot of organizations in our society tend to convey that you can't have invest too much in people, because then you'll be impartial. I'm sorry, you'll be partial to those people, and you won't act in a balanced and fair way. How do you think that plays into this conversation?
Well, I'm not sure I've run into that, but maybe the new concerns about, not having boundaries in terms of being affectionate. Maybe that's really what you're seeing appear. But again, I've never seen it in the workplace that I've been involved in, that almost invariably good managers, good leaders know who their employees, their team are. They recognize them for what they're doing. They know about their families. They write little notes to people, just the highest level, the lowest level. President George H.W. Bush is one of my favorite Americans. I think he was American nobility and his family. He was just a good example of how you can live life in service to others and still be eminently successful. And we here in this house, I've got two framed thank you notes from George Bush, one to me and one to my wife. Our division deployed over to Saudi Arabia for the start of the Desert Storm campaign. He shows up at Fort Stewart, Georgia. My wife is really in charge of introducing him to 10,000 people, and he spends a day there. They all fell in love with him. At the end of it, he wrote a little handwritten note back to Jill, which is now framed on the wall behind me. So I think recognition, being aware of others, being involved in their life, and being aware that somebody's pregnant or somebody's ill, or somebody's had an accident, or somebody's child has had an adverse reaction to medicine. All this should be part and parcel of being in charge of an organization, and that includes putting an arm around somebody's shoulder and saying, I know this has been a bad day for you. Take Friday off. We'll see you on Monday.
As you're talking, what I'm hearing is be a human, right? Like, be a person who is a human, who cares about other people, who's trying to help everybody move towards something more positive. I think that is innate in leadership in that regard. And so, knowing your people, knowing how to communicate with them, and in whatever way is important to them, in a personal way, that's the thing. When you do hear about presidents who have been highly regarded, there is always this personal touch that comes with that. Um, whether it's George H.W. Bush, President Clinton, whom you worked with, is known for remembering people from decades ago and something about their family, and hey, how's this going, or things of that nature. It's just that personal touch, and even that, just the fact that here's this leader who deigned to interact with me and know something about me. I think that goes a long way to make people feel appreciated, even if they're not getting a plaque or a bonus or whatever it may be. It's just that word.
Yeah. Well, and again, a lot of this isn't just the individual, but some leader starts a pattern of recognition of taking care of employees, and it gets baked into the culture of the organization. I had a grandson who we dearly admire, worked for Dunn Lumber locally, a family-owned business. Really hard physical work. Every summer they hire a bunch of college boys to carry these giant, uh, pieces of wood around and load trucks and that sort of thing. And it was fascinating to me to watch how they deal with these interns. At the end of the week, they'd have pizzas and beer for the kids or soft drinks. And on occasion, they'd go grab somebody who'd done a great job that day and give them $100 bill and earn their excitement for the rest of the summer. So, it's not just presidential level or
Sure.
our
Right.
generals. It's the real business of life occurs in organizations of under 100 people. That's where the heart of America's business and corporate life really is.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was just thinking about, I was thinking when I was that age, if somebody gave me $100, I would have been delighted. I'll tell you that.
Sure.
The second thing was the idea of the challenge coin. Like, I think that's something that is, I mean, having been in the military, and for those who are listening that don't know, I'll just sort of explain it. But certain people at certain ranks, and and more, it's across even some enlisted folks certainly have challenge coins. But basically, what it is a custom made metal coin that a person will have and will bestow as an act of gratitude, appreciation, encouragement, whatever you may want to say, upon another military member, usually of a lower rank. And people retain those. I've got buddies who were with me in the military who have these racks in their homes when they were in Iraq or Afghanistan, where they got challenge coins from various folks, and that's a treasured thing, sort of like you were saying, best employee 1986. It's like that. Here was this person who stopped and interacted with me in a meaningful way and appreciated what I was doing and gave me something tangible, and that is tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
Here, General, I think we've had a great conversation about appreciating, recognizing, rewarding folks. And now I've been excited. I mentioned at the outset of the episode that I was hopeful that you could really share with us this story of what it looks like to eat last and be on the first chopper, especially with regard to your battalion commander in Vietnam, because that when you first told me that story, I mean, that's a great story. So if you would, suffer us to share that story, I'd be delighted.
Yeah. Combat sort of accentuates all sorts of leadership situations. The consequences of failure are catastrophic, people getting maimed or killed. So you come to really appreciate first-rate leaders who keep you alive and accomplish the mission. One of our battalion commanders, Lieutenant Colonel Tad Davis, Citadel grad, big, handsome, world-class athlete, very nice man. I took command of a company from one of my friends who was killed in action. And so they gave me command of the company. The next day, I didn't know these people. I didn't know the soldiers. We got another company in terrible trouble, a giant fight going on. We could see the tracers bouncing up in the air several kilometers north of us. And the battalion commander says, I'm going to put you in on top of these people. We've got 18 helicopters inbound. Get ready. So, called in the 5 lieutenants and a first sergeant, gave instructions, and sort of my hand sort of shaking on the map. I told the first sergeant, you be the last one in. I'll be on the first helicopter. We lifted off. We went in. It was dusk as we started to come in. Very heavy ground fire. My chopper got hit. A loud bang. The round went through the floor. This 18-year-old soldier, Larry Wishman, goes like this, gives me a thumbs up when the helicopter gets hit. We land in the dusk. The survivors of the D Company get on the helicopters and disappear. There's mortar rounds landing. we had a little perimeter. I called, the lieutenants automatically came in, and we met on a mound in the dark. And I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk off this LZ and get out into the bamboo and get under cover for the night. By the way, that mound in the dark turned out the next morning to have been an occupied North Vietnamese Army bunker. They were in it. And so
I guess they were asleep.
Well, no, I think they were terrified. And so we're walking single file, hacking through bamboo to try and get away from the LZ. And somebody behind me keeps banging into me. And I turn around at the dark figure, and he's got a case of machine gun ammo on his shoulder. And I finally grabbed him and said, God, watch it. And it was my battalion commander, Tad Davis. And so we finally get into off the LZ, we get into a perimeter. I can hear him and his two radio operators commanding the battalion from my company. The next day, when things calmed down, I said, Sir, why didn't you tell me you were there? And he said, well, you're brand new. And he said, I listened to the order, and it sounded like you knew what you were doing, so there's nothing I had to say. We love this guy. Just an amazing leader.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that again. And that's, by the way, that is in my book, that story about Tad Davis, just because I think it really does a great job of this concept that born out of the Marine Corps now has been disseminated widely, but officers eat last, this kind of thing. And so phenomenal story, General. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that is a wrap for our episode of The Science of Leadership. General McCaffrey, again, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. It's always delightful to get to interact with you and learn from you, get wisdom from you. And so thank you, sir.
Tom, good to be with you. Good luck with your work.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.